While Miguel Indurain, Laurent Jalabert and Richard Virenque faced each other in the 1996 Dauphiné Libéré, they were postulated as being the main favourites for the Tour de France. However, just after in the Tour de Suisse appeared in a much more discreet manner three other riders who would be the real big surprises of the Grand Boucle a few weeks later. Telecom's Bjarne Riis and Jan Ullrich, and they were protagonists of today, the one-hit wonder Peter Luttenberger, a small Austrian climber who ended up surprising all and sundry in that unique Tour de Suisse. You want to know the story of Lutte and the crazy theory that he was just a lab rat? Without further ado, let the show begin. The Italian Carrera team had been one of the most legendary of the 80s and 90s in world cycling. Riders like Stephen Roche, Claudio Chiappucci and Marco Pantani had been true stars in this stable full of doping and darker arts than seen at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. However, in the 1996 campaign there were serious problems. First and foremost, money. The sponsorship of the legendary sunglasses brand was ending and the team would split in two at the end of the season. And secondly, their two main stars were unable to perform for very different reasons. In the case of Claudio Chiappucci, his best years were already behind him. Younger rivals were also trying EPO, and though always brave, he no longer had the advantage that he used to have over the others. Marco Pantani, on the other hand, was convalescing from a very serious injury sustained at Milano-Torino, where his blood test showed a hematocrit level of over 60%. Therefore, the Italian team, which had some very nice fireworks ready to be used in its last year of existence, needed a test rider to use them on. And that was another climber who was balding, Peter Luttenberger. In his only year as a pro at Carrera, Luttenberger had no outstanding results. And also that winter he broke both elbows in a crash. The injury, however, did not prevent him from shining in his first big test of the season, the Euskal Bizikleta, held at the end of May. This competition, which today you know as Etzulia, had several of the best riders in the world in the competition, such as Miguel Indurain, very motivated to participate at home, the Swiss riders Alex Zülle and Tony Rominger, and the Frenchman Luc Leblanc, amongst other great riders. Peter Luttenberger arrived there as a virtual unknown, but he quickly began to show that he was a rider to be reckoned with. Although in the time trial, won by Zülle over Indurain, he could hardly stand out. In the mountain days he was always amongst the first classified. This was especially evident on the last day of the classic ascent of the Monte Arate, where the Central European man was the only one capable of withstanding the attacks of Indurain and Zülle on the first ramps of the climb. In the end, Big Mig ended up winning the Euskal Bizikleta, but Luttenberger finished 7th and left a very good feeling in the stomachs of his fans. Our favourite Central European man was a peculiar, individualistic guy who hated Claudio Chiappucci's diva character. When the Italian devil failed in the Giro d'Italia, he knew that he would have a chance to shine in the Tour de France. But first he would have to pass the litmus test, the Tour de Suisse. Some of the Tour de France contenders were there, as would be demonstrated on the first day of the competition, in a prologue of almost 6 kilometres. With a commanding lead over the other riders, former teammates and enemies, Evgeni Berzin and Bjarne Riis took the first 2 places in the general classification and sent a message that they were ready for the Tour de France. On the first hilly day, with a finish in Bussigny, a group of 23 riders arrived in the lead. Amongst them, the aforementioned Russian and Dane, but also Peter Luttenberger himself, and a surprising Gianni Bugno, who at 32 years of age was in his best moment of the season after having failed in the Giro d'Italia. It was precisely these 2 riders who would be the best performers on the following day. In another long and hard mountainous day, with a finish in Ulrichen, won by one of the first Kazakhs to sip from the magic cauldron, Andrei Titiriuk, Gianni Bugno, Panaria's Gianni Faricin and Peter Luttenberger distanced themselves from the rest of the favourites and managed to gain a lead of almost 2 minutes over the group of Berzin and Riis. The following day, in a shorter stage finishing in Ascona, it was Bugno himself who won the sprint in the group of favourites, now reduced to only 15, and in which Peter Luttenberger also arrived in surplus. And so strong that the next day he would make the greatest exhibition of his career, making it clear that he was number one in that Tour de Suisse. It was undoubtedly the queen stage of that competition, with almost 200 kilometres between Ascona and Grindelwald, and with very hard mountain passes, such as the Grosse Scheidegg, 16.5 kilometres at 7.7% average gradient. There, with more than 30 kilometres still to go, Luttenberger unleashed a powerful breakaway and escaped from a group that included the leader Faricin, Bugno and Berzin. Without looking back, and with his jumping style on the bike similar to what we would see years later in Mr. Fitted State Contador, Luttenberger was gaining more and more difference over his rivals to reach the finish line with almost 2 minutes ahead of that small group of favourites. The differences were so overwhelming that the next group was already more than 4 minutes behind. Bjarne Riis felt very sick that day, a classic feature of the dark preparations prior to the Tour de France, and he arrived at the finish line accompanied by a very young Jan Ullrich, 17 minutes behind the Austrian from Carrera. He would no longer participate in that Tour de Suisse. However, the mixture of EPO and the transfusions of Dr. Luigi Cecchini would still work very well in that competition. The next day, with Luttenberger as leader, the German telecom duo Udo Bolz and Jan Ullrich took the first 2 places by winning over a group that included Vladislav Ekimov, Alberto Eli and Lance Armstrong himself, who had marked that day in his calendar, a sign that the Germans were very well prepared for the Tour de France. Luttenberger was only missing one test, the final time trial of Frauenfeld, although there Evgeni Berzin won again, demonstrating that he had the best legs of the moment in that discipline, over Faricin, Armstrong and Bugno. Luttenberger defended himself well, and although he lost more than 1 minute to the Italians, he did consolidate his lead. His first victories as a professional, the Queen stage of the Tour de Suisse and the general classification. He would never again win a stage race or any prestigious competition in his career. Carrera's lab rat had achieved his goal. Thus, in the Tour de France he was able to shine, especially in the mountains, where in the Pyrenees he was always in the top 10 of the stages, and in the Alps he consolidated this and finished with the best to obtain a surprising 5th place finish, 7 minutes behind the winner Bjarne Riis. This achievement remains an historic milestone for Austria, and for Peter Pan Luttenberger himself, who brags about it on his personal Twitter account. He obtained a good financial contract with teams like Dr. Linder's Rabobank and Manolo Saiz's Once, but failed to shine on the road again. When he seemed finished with professional cycling in May 2003, his former rival Bjarne Riis remembered him and signed him for the CSC team. He worked as a gregario for Tugboat Hamilton and Carlos Sastre, and still managed to finish 13th in that Tour de France. Years later, a former Rabobank teammate of his claimed to have seen him transfuse blood in a dirty hotel room. To this day, of course, he still denies that he doped. The Austrians claimed the yellow jersey for Luttenberger from the 1996 Tour de France, after the top 4 finishers either confessed to doping or were involved in the Festina affair. And, as Lute himself said, his best successor, the great Austrian cyclist who would succeed him, would be Stefan Denifl. And in case you don't remember him, go back and have a look at the video that we dedicated to him on this channel of Doped Up Monsters.